Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Masculine Mastery, the show where we talk about things that matter to men. I'm your host, Dr. Rasif, and with me today we've got an esteemed guest all the way from Cardiff, Dr. Faraz Ali. Faraz, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Hi, Asif. Thank you for calling me and inviting me. I'm doing absolutely well, by the grace of God. So excited and honored to be invited to your platform.
Great. Now, I've been following you for a while, and actually a friend recommended it. A friend went to I believe it was a Beamer event a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. He said, you need to get this guy on your podcast. He runs the podcast called, he's a dermatologist.
Oh, wow.
He does like
Okay.
and cards and stuff like that. So it's very niche. Mine's a bit
Okay.
generic. He said, on your podcast. And then I thought, let me follow this guy. Am I right? You are based in Cardiff, right?
I am based in Cardiff. That's right. Yes.
And you're born and raised Welshman.
No, so I'm more of an adopted Welshman. I was born in the Middle East. My father was a clinician out in the Middle East. Though he's originally from India, my mother's originally from Pakistan. So I was born in the Middle East. I grew up there in the first few years of my life, and then moved to the UK, as most people do. I think if you're expats in the Middle East, you tend to settle somewhere else, especially for education. So then we moved to the UK and Wales in particular when I was a young boy, and so. I suppose by default I adopted the Welsh nationality. I grew up into being a Welshman, loving every bit of it.
Great, it's a great part of the world. I've worked in South Wales, so I worked in Swansea. I did a few local shifts there as an SHO.
Really? Okay.
Huge plastics department there, big trauma centre in Morriston.
That's right.
Yeah. Medicine there.
It's a fantastic place. Fantastic place in the world. You know, I think for people who have never been to Wales, I recommend it because it's the West Wales is the coastline has been voted the best coastline in the world. So, we'll be touching on mental health and things. But when I worked in Swansea for only 6 months, but it was amazing. It was just being able to go to the beach or for a walk on the coastline after work, especially as a medic, it was a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, no, it's great. I had a great time, and you've got the lovely coast, Aberystwyth, and all these Snowdon and lovely heights.
Yeah.
Part of the world. And also what I found as well, the people are nice. They're very attuned to the culture. Some people speak Welsh even. And I found that in the hospitals, especially when you get rural patients. So actually last year I was working in Shrewsbury, and we had a lot of patients come from Welsh schools, both schools, it's almost in Wales, you could say. And very rural, spoke Welsh. It's really nice.
It is. It's only a small percentage, though, who speak Welsh in Wales. A majority of them speak English as well. So, but it's something that the Welsh government, in particular, are trying really hard to maintain and try and make sure that we don't lose that Welsh language and also So there's a lot of, even if you're just driving around, you'll just see English and Welsh translations everywhere. So, they are. It is a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, and the Welsh ones are just so long as well.
Yes, they are.
I can never pronounce them.
Even I've grown up in Wales, and even I struggle with them. A couple of words I'm good, but otherwise, no. Don't ask me. Don't test me. You'll embarrass me.
The picture of a paper's fine. So, for us, over the last, we're approaching now the end of 2022. COVID rates, I was checking this morning actually, massively dropped. We're getting obviously a rise in flu now, influenza A and B, but COVID rates, thankfully, have really plummeted, which is really good. People have been vaccinated. I've certainly not seen a COVID case for a few weeks, I must say. The last one was in the summer, actually, a severe case anyway. So certainly things are getting back to normal. And you being a dermatologist, majority of your work would have been outpatient-based and perhaps some teleconsultations even before COVID. And then I understand you got redeployed to the front line in 2020 during the first wave. How was that for you?
Well, that for me, and when people ask me that, I think at some point, I haven't yet experienced it, but I think it will bring some sort of post-traumatic stress, at some point in my life. The only way I can compare that experience is like it was preparing to go to war. That's how I would imagine, the whole setup. We had people who had not done general medicine for 20, 30 years versus people like myself who've been a few years out versus junior doctors and medics and their medical students in their final year or fourth year of medicine. everyone and people coming out of retirement. You had one room with tens of these people, and they're being debriefed about COVID, doffing how to wear PPE, and they would go out, and another group would come in, and they would have these big stations with donning and doffing and PPE. Whole groups would come in and go out. Another group would come and go. It was like a factory line. It was honestly really daunting, really frightening at the time. There was a lot of stuff about ethnic minorities being affected a lot, especially. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of initially the people we were losing were from an ethnic minority background. And that was frightening, being a person from a ethnic minority background myself. And I was ready to die. That's the only way I can put it. And I'm grateful to Allah that, and grateful to God that I was okay and managed to go through it. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case for many people that did see. And oddly, though the first wave, I think we all came together amazingly as a community, as a society, as a fraternity in healthcare, but also the people. The second I got redeployed again, if you remember, there was a second wave then in 2021. And for me, that was probably even more upsetting. It was a harder period of time in my life, and I think that was because I was based. That second wave, I actually was based in the step down ward, where people who had COVID but they're not for escalation, but they're not getting better, so they need somewhere to stay. And I saw many people unfortunately pass away, and I still remember their faces and the conversations I was having with family. It was a really, really difficult time for me, but more so people who were admitted, the families who couldn't see their loved ones, before they died. And I remember having conversations with patients who would say to me, Dr. Ali, I don't want to die. And what do you say to that? And they unfortunately, they died, and they died, a few days or a week or two later. And that's you can only do your best to reassure them and keep them comfortable and give them hope. But it was a very, very difficult time. And more for me now, the odd, and I suppose for me, the circle of life was 2 years later, or a year and a half later, I lost my own father on that same ward. And that was, for me, a different perspective on life. I think it changed who I am as a person. But generally speaking, that whole process of being redeployed was, I don't think any one of us are going to forget that moment in our lives. I think it's a once in a lifetime, once in a generation experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely correct. Because I was medical trained anyway. I left my training program just because I didn't find it satisfying, and that was in November 2019, and by February 2020, I got a job as a consultant. I stepped up, and then COVID hit, and it wasn't even. It was just happened. It was. You could say fate and timing. I left training, without even knowing about COVID, and then I stepped up without knowing about COVID. So when I was we had dermatologists, ophthalmologists, gynecologists, some people who, even orthopedic surgeons, for instance, who hadn't done general medicine for, like I said, 20, 30 years. And some of them were in their 50s. They were of BA, ME persuasion, very dangerous times. I was working in an area in Lincolnshire, which is predominantly white, but over half the patients were either black or brown. And I've never seen that before, working there for many, many years. And they were young guys in the 20s and 30s, some teachers. And, that was scary. And I think you made a very poignant point there, ready to die. And I know there was I think Islamic Wills Company, they were offering free wills to NHS staff. And Faraz, I wrote a will in March 2020.
Wow.
Gosh, I was a young guy with a son and a son on the way. And when you write a will for the first time in your life, it really hits you. It brings you into contact with death, face to face with your own mortality. And you said it very nicely there. You were prepared to die. What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I suppose mortality is a very interesting subject. It's one of those things where is the nature of human beings, is the nature of just all of creation that we take life for granted. We do. As doctors, we see death day in, day out. In fact, I think death becomes almost a matter of fact because you see it so often. It doesn't make that any less distressing for the families. It's not any less, it's not any less sort of a severe of an occurrence. But the fact is, when you see it day in, day out as a doctor, you suppress a part of your reaction to that. Your normal reaction to death is very different to going to a funeral, because I remember certifying my first death. You probably do as well as a junior doctor, and it's an odd experience. It's quite humbling, but it's also, you treat the deceased with respect, and it's the whole idea of, well, you're here one day and you're not. And I think somehow, as medics, we seem to forget the value, because you see so many patients. You see that there's so many people who are unwell in hospital, and you might look after a ward with 30, 40 patients. Many of them may or may not make it, and you have to turn off a part of yourself. You have to be able to cope. You absolutely, does not mean you don't have that empathy or you don't have that respect. Of course not. But when you're faced with that day in, day out, you have to learn to cope with that. You have some coping mechanisms. But I think part of that basically means you forget the reality of death and what it means. And I think even as medics, and even as I'd say, even as people who are not medics, you have to remind yourself what death means. People are not just an isolated existence. They are full of memories. They are full of people and relationships. They are full of incredible events and miracles of their life. And when someone dies, I was just thinking about this the other day. When my father passed away, that was for me the first close death that I've experienced, and it made me a better doctor. There's no other way to put it. It made me a better doctor, because now I've gone through that. I realize, actually, wow, all of a sudden this is a whole person who influenced thousands of people, who was known by thousands of people, who was loved by thousands of people, has a bank of memories that will never be accessed again. And it's suddenly gone. And actually the impact on the family is significant. But, the doctor on the ward would have done a death certificate and then gone on to the next patient. And it's very easy to forget that. It's very easy as a medic, as a human, just to forget that there are more aspects to death than are apparent, and that meets the eye. There's a whole network of relationships and memories that are attached to a person. And my field, actually, in dermatology, my specialist interest is quality of life, is the impact on quality of life. So I studied that for my PhD. And it's always one thing I've learned, and I think is always worth considering, no matter which field you practice in or what you do, is the impact of anything on a person's quality of life, but also the impact on the family, because they still suffer long after your decisions as a medical professional, or long after an event has happened. There are consequences that can shape the realities and the futures of all these people. And so, when I say that I was prepared and ready to die, it was realizing that this could be it. Everything that's led to this moment, what have I done in my life? What were my intentions behind it? The things I've achieved, the things I haven't achieved. It gives you a new zeal for life. It gives you a new purpose and appreciation. I looked at my wife and my children in a different light. We made a decision. A lot of people, and you saw in the news that people were, they were meeting their loved ones through windows right outside, and I asked my wife, should I just move out and go somewhere and stay somewhere else? And as a family, we decided no, it's not worth it. If we're going to if you're not going to make it through this thing, then we'd rather be together and suffer the consequences together as a family. And so I decided to stay home. So we came to a middle ground. I'd come home. I wouldn't touch anyone, not even my kids. And, that's really hard. Kids come running to you, Baba, and, we lift them up, we want to kiss them. But I used to go straight to the bathroom, have a shower, get rid of everything, and then make sure I'm clean. And then I'd go to the kids. But that's probably, it was a middle ground for us. And I think there's something to be said about mental well-being and emotional well-being. And that was for us a coping mechanism when we had nothing else in the world that could keep us going.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, because talk about nothing else in the world. Everything was shut down. You couldn't see your parents, your elderly father, who you wouldn't have known was in the last couple of years of his life.
Mm, mm.
And the restaurants were closed. Kids, because my youngest is a COVID baby, and he was born in the first wave actually, and
Wow.
he's markedly different to his older brother. He's
Yeah.
socially a bit more reserved.
Mm.
He's got attachment and attachment issues, anxiety problems, because for the first 18 months of his life, play groups were closed,
Yeah.
nurseries were
Yeah.
closed. So it had a huge impact on mental health of younger people, and the other end of the spectrum, elderly, loneliness, and actually not saying goodbye to your children. And I saw personally a lot of patients, elderly, having to say, literally say goodbye via
Yeah.
tablet or via
Yeah.
an iPad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you mentioned something at the beginning, Faraz, and that was very, very powerful. You said patients saying, "I don't want to die," because the thing with COVID, it caused that acute pulmonary edema. It's
Yeah.
like you're drowning, and so
Yeah.
sometimes death is instant. An MRI
Mm,
or
mm,
CT.
mm.
But when you know you're dying, as in your breathing's getting more laboured, you can't take it more. It's like an asthma attack. An asthma
Yeah.
attack,
Mm,
you know
mm.
your airways are constricting, and you
Yeah.
get that impending doom. And I remember there was one nurse who actually passed away. She was Afro-Caribbean in the mid-50s, and I had worked with her before. And we couldn't get her to ITU. She had so many comorbidities. And we
Yeah.
said, "Doctor, I don't want to die. I can feel
Gosh.
like, my lungs are filling with water." And their memories stay with you, because these are people who are relatively young in their 50s and,
Yeah.
years left of service at least, never mind of quality of life. So you mentioned
Yeah.
quality of life there, Faraz.
Mm,
You did a PhD
mm.
in London on that. What exact topic was it? Was it psoriasis and quality of life, or was it?
That's right.
Yeah, was that right?
Yeah, it was more specific with psoriasis and the impact of psoriasis on quality of life and how we can measure it and improve that. But generally, even my role currently as an academic is looking at quality of life issues across the board, really. Mostly dermatological conditions, but more recently looking at the impact of any medical condition on families, for example. We published recently the impact of COVID on family members.
Mm-hmm.
People who've suffered with COVID on family members. So, it's a broad topic, and
Yeah.
actually, I happen to fall into this whole topic of quality of life and research based on quality of life. That's something I never went out looking for, but because the research opportunity opened up, I sort of fell into it, and that's what I loved about it, because I think it's something that people don't talk about.
Yeah.
Quality of life is actually everything. It's having quality of life is really interesting. When you ask people, actually, there are certain questionnaires. I mean, how do we assess whether a treatment is effective or not? And one of the ways we do that is by actually asking people questions after taking the treatment, how their health is and how their health changes after a treatment. So you can look at it by looking at a clinical measure, or you can look at it by looking at a patient-reported outcome measure. So, how does your condition affect your ability to do shopping, your ability to look after yourself? Does it cause anxiety? Does it cause depression? And that sort of thing. And one of the questions that we ask patients is, if you were to have perfect health, how many years of your life would you be willing to shave off? So if, for example, today you would be cured of psoriasis, would you be willing to live 10 years less if you had perfect skin? And that's a measure that health economics and health economists use for measuring the efficacy and the sort of economic value of an intervention. And that to me is really striking. If I was to ask anybody, if I was to ask myself, how many years of my life would I be willing to shave off? But that tells you that actually some people are so fed up of their condition, they're so impacted by it, they're willing to give up lives, the aspects of their lives, years off their lives, to have perfect health. And that sort of impact on quality of life is something you don't understand unless you go through something similar, any sort of event. I think it is an important subject.
And skin is the largest organ, and it's the most visible organ. You can hide a liver condition, you can hide a heart condition, but it's very difficult to hide acne, to hide scarring, keloid formation. And I used to do in my younger years modeling. I know the impact of skin, acne scarring. And interestingly, yesterday I was watching a program about Cristiano Ronaldo. And when he moved across, he had terrible acne scarring when he moved from Madeira to mainland Portugal, and that was a cause of mental health. Obviously, in them days, it wasn't as talked about it as now. But there's a direct link between, and then we wrote a paper about this about a couple of years ago, body image, and beyond the actual physical shape and size, skin comes out number one in terms of perceived body image. So you could have a great body, so to speak, but if your skin, if you've got scarring or some sort of psoriasis, for instance, or intractable eczema, or something, perhaps a child with scar, even I've got one here on my forehead. I'm always conscious about it. I'm always inside. It affects my body, my image more than anything else. Literally, it's a scar on my head there. And the back of my head, so I never show the back of my head. And it's really interesting because I did a master's degree at university. I integrated, and we looked at vitriol attacks in Pakistan. So jealousy and domestic violence. So the man or his family sometimes would throw acid on the woman's face, attack, and she'd get horrible scarring, burn literally, third degree from sulfuric acid, and the physical pain will subside after a few days or a few weeks. But it's the mental torture that takes place after so many years, and we've seen now the case of Katie. Is it Katie Piper, I believe, who got attacked with acid in the UK? So, mental health and skin. We've talked about quality of life, but in terms of depression, social anxiety, agoraphobia, just inability to want to go out because of your skin condition, have you seen a link there, and especially during COVID, where things were exacerbated because of the waiting list in dermatology?
Oh yeah. I mean, we've had people who came in with really severe exacerbations of otherwise chronic skin conditions. People with their eczema and their psoriasis that's just been sitting there and no one's been able to do anything about it. Acne that's become scarring, like you said, because where they would qualify for more advanced treatments, they just weren't having access to that. And unfortunately, dermatology was one of those subjects that was pushed to the back because it's always considered, unfortunately, something which is routine, is outpatient, doesn't have that sort of same push as acute medicine. But unfortunately, the patients suffer as a result of that. And just because something does not kill you does not mean it does not kill you in a different way. That's a big thing we need to realize as a health body, that things can damage you in more ways than one. And it's not just about keeping people alive, but keeping them alive and happy with themselves and with that condition, living in that way. And unfortunately, we absolutely saw that with COVID. We saw people, and we're still playing catch up. We're still, honestly, I'm seeing patients who've been waiting a year or two after their referral, and that's not right. I think we have to do something about that. But the mental health is a huge thing. It absolutely is a huge thing, and people don't understand that. People don't, unless you go through that. You don't necessarily understand that. And the other problem I'd say is we live in a very unique time. 30 years ago, you didn't have social media.
Yes.
And now, because of social media, social media by itself is linked to depression and anxiety. Just the use of social media without any other issues, without any other sort of problems that might plague you. But if you have a physical or visible condition and you're on social media, then bullying is rife, especially in school, and it just made it so much easier. And people are cowardly online. People will hide behind fake usernames, and it's easy to do it. And unfortunately, we're seeing the sort of depression and anxiety in like 13-year-olds, which is really sad. That's the age where you should be playing, going out, having fun, being all sort of wide-eyed with ambition and wanting the most out of life. But we're killing our children well before before their time because of the negative impact of sometimes social media. But I say that, and sometimes social media can be empowering for people with skin diseases. So we've seen a lot of that. People discuss their condition and they get empowered by it. So it's just about using social media wisely. But I just think we live in a different time, and unfortunately, there are lots of different factors we do have to keep a close eye on and just study these avenues. I think we just have to be careful with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's certainly now there's been a push to really scrutinize and reduce the use of airbrushing and Photoshop
Yeah.
because that's just creating really unrealistic beauty standards.
Yes.
And Dove did a campaign, a couple of, during COVID actually, got doctors and nurses. It was a Canadian campaign, but it was commissioned by Ogilvy in London. And they show
Mm-hmm.
now I've still got some scarring on my face from
Mm-hmm.
the PPE mask. It's not. It's there forever now.
Yeah.
And Dove did a campaign saying, scar is beautiful. Beauty lies in being real and authentic. Beauty is not Beyonce being airbrushed 3 shades lighter. That's not
Yeah.
beauty. I mean, seeing a lot of that. And as a dermatologist, you're probably seeing the extreme end of that now as well. And I know people, certainly when I was at med school, when I used to be in dermatology clinics, there'll be young people who would want to get rid of the acne at all costs, even with fertility issues down the line, isoretinoin, etc. They would, they get counsel about these things, but they wanted a cure. They wanted, a quick fix because the impact it was having. And I've never seen anything have as much impact as acne in teenagers,
Yeah.
especially young girls. The hormonal changes, as you know, as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spots, and because now, like you said, 30 years ago, there was no social media, but now they have unrealistic expectations, and they're comparing themselves. And there's quite a lot of suicides in young teenage
Yeah.
girls.
Yeah.
13 years old, and actually there was a guy a couple of months ago. He had, I think he's from Wales actually. He did a campaign, and he wrote to the Meta saying, "Look, these algorithms, machine learning, it was coming from my daughter's feed. She had acne, I think,
Yeah.
and then these job adverts and all these things were coming up, and it's really setting the bar unrealistically high."
It is. It is. And I mean, that's why I don't want my kids to be on social media for a while yet, or certainly until they're ready to face it, or have got the tools to face it. I think we're lucky. I think you and I, Asif, probably grew up in a generation where we sort of adopted and grew with the internet.
Yes.
And I think that was good. It was easy. It was easier to balance that. But now our children are molded by it. They're absolutely, to quote Bane. Like my daughter went up to the TV screen and started tapping it because she thought it was touch screen. And it's interesting because then you see these little things. These are interesting. We never had handheld devices really, and now everything's just at the palm of our hands. So you're absolutely right. I think we have to keep this in mind, and absolutely that's why I think it's absolutely crucial when you and whenever I speak to any sort of health professional, I say it's all well asking, you've got 10 pimples on your face, you've got 10 spots, fine, but how does that make you feel and how does that impact you? Because that question is both of those questions, the how many spots do you have versus how does it impact you? They come hand in hand. And there is an argument that how does it impact you is more important than actually how bad does your skin look, because that impact is what really measures, the effectiveness of a treatment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing body dysmorphia now as well, and huge amounts of anxiety. And again, social media brings this on. And I say this a lot to my friends. I don't think, maybe I speak for myself, but I don't think I would have passed med school if there was Instagram or YouTube. The ability to focus decreases. I've noticed that now.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I work for 4 hours at med school. But now your ability to focus decreases because in social media, yes, it has good uses, but I think we've kind of grown with it. YouTube came out, Instagram, Facebook came out, Twitter came out. It was nice, kind of a sporadic release, whereas these guys are getting now, and it's even worse with TikTok and Snapchat. These are just attention-grabbing algorithm machines that are really just grabbing the attention and.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's so true. That's so true. And I've revised my relationship with all of these platforms over the last few years, and it goes up and down. For me, it goes up and down. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do this, and I use it daily, and I'll produce daily. And other times I'm like, well, no, actually, maybe I don't want this in my life. So you're right. You're absolutely right. But they're designed for one thing, and that's to hook you.
Absolutely, because you don't pay for them, and you pay for them with the greatest currency, which is your attention. But you mentioned there, you touched upon creation. How important is content creation, particularly for medics?
It's a fine line. So content creation, I think I've indulged in a lot of it. But I've learned a lot over that period of indulging in content creation. A lot of my stuff was humorous, and a lot of it was also information based and educational. But I'm yet to figure that out, because I think, what's the line that you can cross as a professional, health professional? What is that? What is okay to joke about and what isn't? What is okay to mention, and what sort of part of yourself are you okay to show on a public platform that may or may not be interpreted as professional, if you see what I mean. So that's one challenge, I would say, as a medic. Absolutely. Because I think traditionally there's something, some sort of persona that's associated with being a doctor. I can only speak about doctors, but certainly being a health professional generally. But I'm not, and I think generally that is quite serious and boring, if I'm honest with you. Like a doctor's always considered that, right? They're quite serious, they're boring, they straight to the point. And when you add entertainment to the mix, how does that impact everything? And actually, I've had good and bad experiences with that, and things that I've learned along the way. And the problem is, I think you have to be very careful with, upsetting people, but also, 'cause there might be something that you believe in strongly from a medical point of view. And actually, there are groups out there that may not agree with you. You can have people who have different opinions about a certain product or different opinions about a certain treatment, and it's about balancing that as a medic. If you're giving out information, if you're trying to create content, it can be a difficult process. You have to just be careful, I would say. But at the end of the day, I think our duty and our Hippocrates oath is that we do what's best, and we promote goodness and wellness. And I've got a couple of friends who've done a lot of amazing stuff, content creation wise, over COVID, and especially about the vaccinations. When you have misinformation being spread that might kill people, that might harm people, then actually I think content creation is invaluable. It's something that can save lives, and it's important. You get all sorts of insane things being spread that have no medical or scientific basis and can actually be harmful and can be really injurious to health, right? There is a gap. There really is a gap between that healthcare body and the younger generation, and I think content creation is one of those ways of closing that, because otherwise, how are you getting this stuff across? How are you getting stuff across? Managing your diabetes, right? You can go into your GP and you'll find out about it, but outside of that, how are you going to get that? As say someone who's 16 with diabetes, how are they going to get adequate information that's relevant to them, unless it's a viral TikTok song that comes on and you use it to educate them? So sometimes it's about using viral trends and topics to educate people. But it's a double-edged sword. It really is. Whereas I was once very, very active, I decided to calm things especially after my father passed away. I decided to just back down a bit and focus on family, because I felt for me that was more important. And it's about balancing things. I think social media creation is good, but it has its other addictions to it. I think I was at a time when I was creating a lot, and I would check comments a lot, and I'll always be on my phone a lot, and my kids would be talking to me, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm talking to them, but I'm here like, yeah, and I'll just be doing this sort of thing, right? And I realized, whoa, man, well, actually, and at some point, many years ago, my son goes to me, Baba, I hate your phone. He goes, I hate your phone. I'm like, whoa, man, that's an eye opener. And it's about balance. It's all about a balance. I think content creation is really important. People who do it, you got to have a strong willpower. You got to have strong self-control and self-discipline. That's really important. And it is important, because at the end of the day, I think that's how you get important information out. So, there are two elements to it: what you feel about it yourself and how it impacts your life, but also what your content creation can do for others around the world and what good it can do. And we do need that. And I think it's just about balancing that, and that's really, I think, which is individual to everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a nuanced kind of approach, and I think you're right.
Absolutely.
A 16-year-old who's been newly diagnosed with type 1, he's not going to go to his local library and get a book, or it'll be receptive to a leaflet from the GP. He's going to want to see an Instagram reel or a TikTok video about managing diabetes complications. And a great example of that is a singing dentist.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He's doing a great public health job. Well, he's doing his poor health, and he's been on GMTV and all these things. And he's doing great. And certainly for my sons, it's very important to have that a good oral hygiene. And that's where content creation can be really, really useful.
Absolutely.
And we've seen, Faraz, the last 2.5 years, like you mentioned, absolute misconceptions and fake science and fake news. And it is our job, actually, you could say,
it is
an Hippocratic oath to dispel these myths. It really is. Because, these are injurious. They can cause injury, they can cause death, they can cause debt, they can cause depression, and so much devastation. If, let's not get vaccinated, let's do this, let's do that, all these kind of things. They can actually cause a lot of that, especially in our communities. And I did some work with the BEMA, especially about vaccination uptakes and just dispelling myths. And it is a double-edged sword, because WhatsApp now, people forwarding messages, fake news, forwarding it, and then by the time, and I used to get that from my dad. My dad says, it's the same with his message, I'm like, Dad, no, this is fake, this is not right. Let's, and so it is important. And he mentioned at the beginning for us, and I think this is really important now, we're in the middle of December, days are short, although I did check today, tomorrow is the last day of the year where the days get shorter. So today is winter solstice.
Fantastic. Yes. Lovely.
The shortest day of the year. Tomorrow is also the shortest day of the year. And then from the 23rd...
They start getting longer.
So mentally, for me, I'm someone, dark-skinned, like we get seasonal affective disorder, and this as a dermatologist, and melanocytes and vitamin D, etc. So I double up on my vitamin D during these winter months. But there's no doubt it affects my mood. There's no doubt. I would say from September to March, my mood just plummets, and especially in December. December's a hard month. You wake up it's dark, and you come back from work and it's dark. What kind of tips do you have as a dermatologist? Because everyone says 20-30 minutes a day of sunlight. How do we get that?
So. Well, that's in UK. It's hard. It really is. It's about, look, as a dermatologist, we always advise safe sun exposure. It's all about safe sun exposure. There's UVA throughout the year and UVB throughout the sun exposure, but UVA is one of those rays which actually can exist, and there's a low level that exists even at night. So even if you go out at night, you're getting a bit of UVA exposure. Many people don't know that, but you do. You get a bit of UVA exposure, and UVA is one of those things that causes photoaging, for example, and gets you to look older much quicker if you have enough exposure to UVA. But vitamin D supplements is a good idea, especially if you're from a BAME sort of background. I think it's fantastic. We've got one that we take regularly. I take one. I try and take one regularly as well. Vitamin D. Good unit. Make sure you take a good amount of units. But I suppose it really is hard in the winter months. But going for a walk for a little bit in the hours that is not too bright, it's good. It's good for your mental health. It's good for your skin. Absolutely. There are a lot of perks of sun exposure as well. I mean, it's not all bad. Even as dermatologists, we admit that there are some perks, like you said, vitamin D. But it's good for your mental health. What's that? What's that compared to anything else? Mental health is so important, and just going for a little bit of a walk sometimes can be invaluable. In the winter months, the days are getting longer now, but as long as if you're adequately covered in terms of sun exposure, then it's a couple of 10-20 minutes is really no harm. But yeah, I mean, I guess you mean from a skin protection point of view in terms of winter. Is that what your question was more about? Or
it was because the sun's so limited. It was mainly to do with supplementation. So vitamin D.
Vitamin D. So I think anyone's routine should have, especially from an ethnic minority background, then vitamin D. Absolutely, I think it's a good thing to do. Once you're deficient, the recommendation generally is, once you're deficient with vitamin D, which most likely you are going to be in the UK as an ethnic minority person, you are more likely to be deficient. In which case, you need to be taking vitamin D all the time anyway. There's no such thing as you just take a small course and that's it. You should be supplementing it forever, really, ideally. That's one thing. Second thing is, moisturize regardless. Moisturize your skin. You should have a good skin routine. You should have something, because if you're doing that, then the quality of your skin is better, and and how it interacts with everything else in the environment is better. So and we're a bit of SPF. It's always good to do that, even in winter months. If you're not from ethnic minority background, it's even more important, because you can get skin cancer even by living in the UK. I would say vitamin D supplementation, moisturize your skin, and wear your SPF. Those are my 3 key things, I would say. Even as ethnic minority background, because the SPF, people think, oh well, I'm brown, I'm not going to get skin cancer. While that might be true, statistically speaking, it's not unusual. People can get melanomas and things like that from ethnic minority background. But it's more your health of your skin is better if you protect it against the sun.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned photo aging there. There's a really interesting picture I saw of a guy from Australia who was a truck driver.
Yeah, that's right. The famous picture.
Yeah, 30 years of truck driving, and one half of his face is.
Yeah.
There again, and I know in South Africa and in Australia, the Caucasian population there does suffer from BCCs and melanomas and
right. But here as well, I see it. That's literally our bread and butter. We see it every day. I see tens and tens. I do 4 surgical sessions, up to 4 surgical sessions a week, and majority of them are skin cancers. So it's very real. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Sun can be a silent killer, regardless.
Yeah.
But if it's not causing skin cancer, it's causing, like you said, photo aging. It's causing photo damage. It can cause dry skin. It can have all sorts of impact on your skin health. I think it's good to look after that, because, like you said, it's one of those things which is visible, but it's the skin is the representation of your inner body. It's the representation of your inner health, in a way. And that's why almost every medical condition has some sort of skin association with it, which is incredible. The skin really is a tool of communicating, your body's way of telling the world what's actually going on inside. And there's so much coming out about this now. Eczema and psoriasis, they're increasingly being recognized as systemic conditions rather than just a skin condition. And I think we're going to learn a lot more about that going forward, actually.
No, it's why you guys have to do MRCP for your sins,
Yes, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
When I was at SHO, I had to cover dermatology, and I couldn't believe all the core medical trainees, who wanted to do dermatology were all doing MRCP, and
that's it.
We dreaded exams. But you're right. People often think skin conditions are benign, but they spread to the liver and the lymphatic system, and they can spread to the bones quickly.
Or vice versa. It could be stuff that originate there spreading to the skin.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's quick, 6 months to a year, bang, that's it. You're terminal. Like, if you don't pick it up, you're losing weight without knowing, and you've got more which is malignant and growing for many, many months, and you don't really know. I think social media, phones, smartphones have made it easier. So whenever I see a patient and they've got like something on there, I'll say, take a picture, monitor it, check it over a few days. So I think that has helped. And with the whole referrals to dermatologists, taking pictures of smartphones and all that kind of stuff.
It's brilliant.
It's reduced friction. Now, Faraz, I really wanted to talk about grief. You mentioned your father, and I saw your tweets on which got a lot of responses actually. And like you say, medics, we almost objectify death. For death, for us, it's just a death certificate. It's a number. Patient in cubicle 2A has passed away. Yeah. Can you certify?
Yeah.
Sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning on a night shift, you certify 3A, and you write a few things, etc. But there's no emotional attachment there.
No.
Especially after dozens and dozens of deaths. The first one hits you. The first one.
That's right.
After that, it just becomes just caring for a patient, really. This is a patient deceased, you respect them, you check their pulse and their pupils, and then you leave them in peace. But when it comes to your family, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently. My father's elderly, and I'm the eldest son. And even the last 2 or 3 years, even before COVID, I went to a few workshops on how to perform ablution, how to put perfume on the body, how to shroud the body, how to lower the body. And I try to refresh that every few months. I've got a book as well.
Beautiful.
And, because it'll be on me. My siblings are over 12 years old, teenagers. It'll be on me as the eldest son to perform this.
Yeah.
So I'm mentally ready for the process of death, but I'm not ready for the process of grief, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did it hit you? And even as a doctor who's seen so much death, how did it first hit you when you got the news of your father's?
My father.
And he was a respected doctor, I believe.
Yes, he was. So he was a GP who retired a couple of years ago. And actually, his biggest dream was to see me become a dermatologist. He had a special interest in derm himself, but that was one of his dreams, and eventually became my dream. My second-hand dream. I took it on from him. This topic of grief is very, very interesting, Asif. It's a very deep concept that I don't think I ever really thought about properly until I lost my father. And it actually opens your eyes to a lot of things, And I think I don't think being a doctor makes any difference. It doesn't. I still felt unprepared. I still felt as if I wasn't a doctor. My profession became irrelevant in a way. I suppose the only thing where it informed me is I knew when my dad was dying. I was blessed to be by my father's side when he breathed his last. And I could tell, and I think that's a blessing and a curse equally. Like you said, we do MRCP, we're doctors, we're qualified doctors, we know when someone's dying. And I knew my mom was someone who's not from a medical background. She was a housewife, and she had a lot of hope, a lot of faith. And it's hard to tell your mom that, no, actually, mom, dad's not going to make it out of this. I'm pretty sure. You can never know when. As Muslims, we never know when. We believe that only God knows these things. But you have a educated guess that dad's not going to make it out of this, and there's certain signs. And when you start seeing those signs, then death becomes a reality. I will honestly say this: death for me was really not a reality. We read about it, we remember it in our religious scriptures, we hear about it every time we go for khutbah or for Friday prayers. Our family friends might pass away, uncles and aunties might pass away, but the reality of death does not hit you until it is someone like your father or your mother who passes away. That's one thing which is absolutely true. And the fact that someone is there one day and then all of a sudden not there, it's something which is really, it's something. It's been 3 months and I still haven't really come to terms with it. I look at my father's car and I look at the driving seat and I focus really hard hoping he'll materialize, or look at his favorite seat and, I might look at his texts and the things he used to send me and a conversation. Sometimes I wish I could have a chat. I've been a consultant now for a couple of months, but which my dad never really got to experience, but he knew I became a consultant, which was his biggest dream. And I'm glad he got to see that. His last words were introducing me as a consultant dermatologist literally before he died. One of the last few words he said, amongst other amazing words, we got him to say the Shahada and things. And that was a beautiful moment. But is the reality, I think, is the grief, I think, is a very individual process. You can do things which are constructive. You can do things which are destructive. It's hard to know, because how do you know? You've never done it before. You need people who are, But one thing, someone told me that when you lose your father, it's like when you experience your first death, your first moment of grief, you are a new person. And for me, the old Dr. Faraz, he died. He went. I'm there somewhere, but I'm a completely new person. I've got this new understanding of life, a completely odd new understanding of life, because now death is a reality. Where is my dad? I honestly, every few days, literally probably every day, I think about this. I say, Dad, where are you right now? Where are you? What sort of existence? No one in the history of mankind has ever come back to go and explain where the next step is. If you're a person of faith, we know and we expect and we believe, right? And people have all sorts of different faiths and beliefs across the world. And, but as a Muslim, I have my own beliefs. And that became a lot more strong. That's number one. But number two, as if I realize who really matters in my life. That's the interesting thing. We give importance to a lot of people, a lot of things that don't really matter ultimately. And I mean that in a respectful way. We chase things and we vie for things and crave things that ultimately might be fruitless and don't mean much. But you realize who your friends really are as well. Like, it was a lonely process. Grief for me was a very lonely process. And I realized after my dad passed away, I was there at the hospital. My mom was there and my sister, the whole family, like the immediate family, just me and my sister and my mom. We were, just four of us, and that's all our family. And we were all there at the time of dad's death. And it was and afterwards we had a couple of family who come and they stay with you for a week or two, etc. Eventually everyone has to go back to their own lives, but you don't. You have a new existence. And there's some people who will be in touch, who will look after your mental health and your well-being. And there are people who you expect to do that who don't. And you think, wow, actually, I think times of grief also really highlight who's important in your life, who makes an effort in your life, but also the importance of being there for people in grief. And the first thing I realized was, wow, I probably have been a terrible friend for some of my friends who've been through grief. And I wish I had done more. I wish I've done more, because I realized that people who I expected to help me weren't there. They just really weren't. And that's just the unfortunate truth and reality of it. They just weren't. And grief can be a lonely place. But 3 weeks after my father passed away, as if, my father-in-law was unfortunately quite unwell. He had end-stage MS. He was only 62. And earlier in the year, in May, he got diagnosed with lymphoma out of nowhere. So my wife had already booked tickets to go see her father while my dad was, on the deathbed. And she was meant to fly out in a week. And I said, look, you go see your father. Your father is end of life. Your responsibilities to your dad. Don't worry about me and don't worry about my dad. I'm here for him, but you have to go for your father. And she was feeling very guilty about it. But it's like sometimes God plans and, yes. We plan, but God plans. And my dad died. After this conversation, my dad died the next day. His funeral happened the day after. A week later, my wife flew out with all of our children. And within 2 weeks, her father passed away. So my children have lost 2 grandfathers in 3 weeks who they were very close with. And it's really interesting because grief affects you. I'm an adult who's seen death so much because of my profession. But it still hit me hard. A few days ago, I was lying in bed with my 4-year-old son who was sniffling. And I thought he was just a bit ill. And I turned around and he was actually crying. I said, what's wrong? He's like, I don't want to die. He was crying, saying, I don't want to die. And I'm like, he's saying, I don't want to go to paradise. I don't want to go to paradise. I'm like, why don't you want to go to paradise? And he burst out crying, saying, because I don't want to go to the grave. And for me, that was such a reality check. It was such a heart-wrenching moment because I'm like, this is my 4-year-old who's really trying to come to grips with the reality. We've been talking to our children about it as much as we can. People bottle up different things. Kids bottle up different things. And, this is why counseling is important. That's another taboo in our community, right? Grief counseling and things like that. And there are lots of unfortunate practices that occur especially in our society, in ethnic communities. But one thing is for sure, I think the community that our parents had was phenomenal. They're there for each other, actually. Yeah. But our generation is a very Netflix generation. When I say Netflix honestly, it was really funny. No one really came to the people I expect. No one really came. No one really showed up. People will text you and they'll WhatsApp you once or twice because in the Netflix generation, that's sufficient. That's our communication. But that. Can you tell a patient they've got cancer by a text message? No. And the reason why we learned that, why are we taught communication skills as a medic? Because we know that body language, putting a hand on someone's shoulder means a lot more than just writing a letter or sending a text. And when you tell somebody bad news, what's the recommendation? Bring somebody with you. Why? Because it helps you process. All of humanity and all of our relationships are based on this physical aspect of grief and physical aspect of coping, which we have completely lost. That opened up, this whole process of grief has opened up my eyes to that. The fact that we've lost that. Oh my God, we are completely away from it. Not only from a Muslim aspect, from a Sunnah aspect, in terms of what's recommended in our Muslim scriptures and what I believe to be true as a Muslim, but also as a humanity, as a society, we are just. I'm not sure whether it's just like too awkward now. People say, "Oh, I just want to give this person space," and that's it, and they just give space forever. There are some people who are around me; they're just giving me space forever, and I've just never seen them. Where I expected, I can't lie, I expected to see them, I expected them to be around, but they just haven't been, and it's just really interesting because that's that's not what I grew up to believe. Whereas my mom, when she lost her husband, people were over every single day from her generation, bringing food, so visiting her. They're busy people. They've got lives, but they were still doing that. They were making time. And in fact, if I think back to my younger days, even our parents' generation, they would visit each other all the time. There's the pros and cons in how that was done, but that network was there. Certainly, that social network. And I think grief is that's why I don't think grief should be there are elements of grief that should be individual. Absolutely, they always are. But grief is also a sociable event. It's a shared event. Grief is a shared event because you learn from each other, you support each other, but it's about, giving people space, but also being there for them. When my father died, I appreciated people showing up the same day. Some people ask me, is it okay to come? And I'll tell them, yeah, sure. It's fine. Other people didn't because they thought, leave him be. But actually, sometimes just showing up for people means a lot. You don't have to be overbearing or overburdening. You can read between the lines. You can just ask people, what they want and, give people space. It's about having that communication, that expectation. And I just think I feel sorry for the next generation. Yeah. We'll be consoling each other over TikTok, literally.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely. And we'll have to book in appointments and send emails, condolence emails, like e-condolence. And I think, Faraz, you're right. I think our parents were the last generation of humans. We're becoming increasingly robotized, machine. Everything is being automated now. Emotions, this whole, you talked about memory bank when someone dies. Elon Musk is trying to make the neural link, the kind of downloadable brain. And we are becoming increasingly machinized. Everything's become like a machine, automated, and even human emotions are now automated. And that kind of, that touch of a doctor is not there anymore. That human touch is not there, the human empathy. And
well, that's it. It's not. It's just, we're just robots, like you said.
Yeah, we're the last, but that was a very, very comprehensive, compelling answer, and I didn't realize in 3 months. I think, from what I've seen online, you have come to terms with it nicely. You're a very strong person. You've
Thank you.
Through grief, I think you've benefited a lot of people, and we all have to go through it. We all have to bury someone, and it's you'd rather bury your father than bury your child, because burying your mother is a rite of passage.
It is. It is. I'm grateful, Asif. I'm grateful. I got to experience I got to experience my dad. I got to have time with him. He had by the grace of God, he lived up to 77. He passed away just before his his birthday, 8 days before his birthday, 77th birthday. But that's the thing that it's. I'm lucky, but there's some people who lose their family members well before, my father-in-law was 62. He was young, he was fit and well. And then suddenly, boom, something hits you. It makes you appreciate life in a different light again. Yeah. And that's why actually after my father died, I cut down a lot right now on social media. I hope to come back. It's a passion for me, and it always has been, but I have, just because I want to spend time. And I thought I want to create memories for my children. And so that one day they're going to bury me, someone's going to bury me. There may be people around there or not, but that's the reality of it. And it's frightening. It's frightening to think about not existing in the world and existing in a different realm is a frightening thought. And I think that's the other thing. I think men generally in our ethnic minorities, in our communities, crying is not really encouraged, or grieving is not really encouraged. You're expected to get up and move on. Which I think is unhealthy as well. You have to grieve. You have to have that time to grieve. I cry most days thinking of my father, and that's okay. And I'm happy to admit that. And I get teary, and I blog about it. I write about it because I think that's the real. That's real masculinity. That's real. You're talking about the absolute, the concept of your show. That's real masculinity. Is to, in my opinion, is to accept that grief, to talk about it. So you're right.
And the Greeks had a concept called memento mori, which is remember death, or remember you're going to die, and amore fati, amore, love. Fati, love your fate, and your fate is the grave, and we know in Islam every single soul shall taste death. And it's interesting because about a week ago I put a tweet saying we can only view life through death. It's like we can only appreciate light when it's darkness. If there was lack of light, we wouldn't appreciate light, and we can only appreciate the finitude of life the small tenure we have on this earth through death. If we live forever and ever, we wouldn't actually appreciate. That's why the concept of heaven in all Abrahamic faiths is every day is better. Because if every day in heaven was the same, although you'll be, enjoying the fruits of heaven, every day was the same, it will lose its value because it's abundant. Anything that's abundant will lose its value. The scarcity of life is what gives it its value because it's few short years, literally.
Absolutely, man. Faith is a beautiful part of life, isn't it? I was grateful for my faith. I think sometimes I don't know how I would have coped without my faith, actually. But that's for me, and I'd be really interesting. People who don't have faith, I would generally be interested, and actually, I would like to see what people's coping mechanisms, how they differ. But for me, a faith is a huge thing. I went. First thing, I started donating in my dad's name. I started collecting funds for charity in my dad's name. By the grace of God, I was able to do a pilgrimage in my dad's name. A small umrah. I did it purely in my dad's name, and these things keep you going. They give you hope and encouragement. So I think faith, in some capacity, is a beautiful thing for grief. It's a blessing. It really is a blessing to have faith in times like that. And I think that definitely, if people aren't there for you, then God is there for you, and that's the underlying support, that the only support you really need ultimately. But that's that's life. Life is not just about having a relationship with God. It's about having the horizontal. You can't have the vertical with God without having the horizontal between people.
Yeah, you have to live in the world, and obviously with God's creation, interaction is a big part of that. And as humans, we love certainty. We would rather have misery and certainty than joy and uncertainty. And death is uncertain for us because the only thing we've known is existence on earth. So faith does give us a bit of certainty, knowing what's happening in the grave and the question. We've got a very detailed narrative. And like you say, if people without faith, perhaps, for them it becomes an abyss, a dark abyss. You've got no clarity there. Whereas faith, all faith gives some kind of narrative, a verdict. Of death. And I think that really does lessen and sweeten some of the pain. The pain will always be there. It's a loss. But the fact that it's a temporary passing on. And I think I was reading someone's auntie passed away a couple of days ago, and they put an announcement on Instagram and saying, "My auntie has passed on to the next phase of existence." And I thought, wow, that's actually a very nice way to conceptualize it. And I thought, wow,
that's it. Yeah. No, it is beautiful. I mean, people cope and rationalize things in their own way, don't they? Ultimately, and there's no right or wrong way that we can say. I just know what's right for me as a Muslim with my beliefs, and in terms of what's the right understanding of death. That's all I can say. But everyone does it differently, and I think it's important because I think you can do destructive things too. So I think it's important to look out for one another. I don't know. I mean. People can get lost in a depressive state after grief. And I think you have to look out for that. And you have to because sometimes you may not recognize it yourself.
Yes.
You may not recognize that you're doing this. And, I've got 4 children. How much can I afford is hard. I can say it's hard being a father when you're grieving. Yes. Like the day after my 3-year-old was having a tantrum. And I'm like, I can't do this. I need to be grieving. I cannot deal with this tantrum right now. I just do not want this right now. And, it's a different, it's a different challenge in life, but, life goes on. That's the thing. Life goes on and it must go on, for the next generation. And, I think that's the beauty of children as well. I think if my dad had died, and we're gifted and blessed to have children, and I'm grateful for that because you have people who work in your name and carry on that legacy, which I think is a beautiful thing in this world. It is a nice thing. And I hope I can continue to do that for my father. And I hope my children can do that for me. God give us all long, healthy lives, full of faith and prosperity. But these are, these are exact reminders. And I think that's where we have to be grateful for every relationship we do have. I think that's been the biggest thing for me. I'm just so grateful for some of the people in my life. But, before my dad died away, my circle was this big. It was, who I thought. But after my dad died, my circle is right here. It doesn't mean I respect anyone else less. It doesn't mean that I've got, necessarily ill-feeling. But what it does clarify and create for you is the people who are ride or die. That's
Yes.
which is really interesting. Which is really it's sad that times like this are what really highlight it.
Yeah. It's the whole part of character refinement. They say you don't really become a man until your father dies.
Yeah.
Because you learn a lot. Now, you're consoling your mother, consoling your sister, trying to be a father, and also trying to be a professional as well, working in a very challenging, environment. And
God, that's hard.
It pushes you to the edge of your capacity. And
Yeah.
only when you operate at that edge will you become better.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's no such thing as a good death, but the timing was almost immaculate. The fact that you were doing your CCT, you saw the signs of, it wasn't a sudden death. You saw the signs of kind of, terminal illness, and you were there, and then your wife's father passed away after that.
Well, subhanAllah, there's another angle. SubhanAllah, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in January this year, and she had surgery and she had chemotherapy, and she was due for radiotherapy. Mm-hmm. And dad went into hospital, and he was alive and sort of hanging on for about 2 weeks. Mum, for the last week of dad's life, was going every day for her radiotherapy treatment until the very last day. The nurses said, okay, now you can go home. Mrs. Ali, you can go home now and celebrate. And she said, celebrate for what? Because on the way back, as she was coming back, the hospital rang. Believe me, literally down to the moment she's coming back, hospital rang, your dad has deteriorated. Mum went from radiotherapy and met me in the hospital with dad. Dad died later that night, early morning. And it's like dad waited for mum to finish her radiotherapy so that she wouldn't have to worry about him. First she finished her treatment knowing that dad's alive, he's fine. And then he went at that time. And that angle for me, because you're talking about timing, but that's from God.
Yes.
I mean, it's from God. For me, that's Allah talking to me directly, to us as a family. That, look, you know what? I'll keep your dad alive until you finish your radiotherapy. You don't have to stress about this. You get it done. I'll keep your dad alive until then. And then dad passes away. And the fact that dad died away in the very place where I was redeployed to cover COVID, the same ward, the exact same ward, to the same sort of, the cubicles that I was looking after. It was like life had come full circle. It's like, God saying to me, Faraz, you've looked after people who died. You've seen how it affected you then, but now I'm going to show you what it actually feels like to lose somebody and what that should mean for you as a doctor, how you should now treat your patients, that angle you should have. And for me, that's changed ever since, because when you see somebody for 10 minutes, you just don't know the conversations they're having for the rest of their lives outside your room. You just don't know. All of that amalgamates in your room. So you're right. Timing was, subhanAllah, from Allah, and it's throughout. I feel like God has been communicating with us as a family, and I forget it, but it's a beautiful reminder for me.
It is. And you mentioned something at the beginning, circle of life. And that is beautiful, It's literally the circle of life. Because it comes full circle. Your father, in the same ward, you were redeployed. And you wouldn't have been redeployed if it wasn't for the pandemic. So even the pandemic played a part in the timing of the thing. So it's amazing. And not only these things, when you view them with the lens of faith, it makes things so much easier to handle. And in France, I think he said there, being a better doctor. And, that's important, taking life experiences and becoming a better doctor. Because being a doctor, you continue your father's name, you give him good deeds by, serving humanity. And a very good book, which you might have read, but I certainly recommend to the viewers. It's called On Being Immortal by Atul Gawande. Okay. I believe he's a geriatrician. It's called On Being Immortal. And he talks about a lot of the elderly patients and and another one called When Breath Becomes Air, when a neurosurgeon has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. And he's got a few months to live. He's young, he's in his 30s, early 40s perhaps. Paul Calamithi, his name is, he's an American surgeon. He's passed away now, but he got diagnosed terminal cancer, and he's like you started blogging. And when mortality hits you in the face, it hits you in the face, you stare into the abyss, and that's when you really appreciate life in its fullest form. By having death there.
And it is a beautiful life. It is. We talk about a lot of negative sides of life. We were talking about all the different things, but there's so much beauty here, and it's so much to enjoy and love and appreciate every little thing. Just the touch of a loved one, and having food, and having, in the current economic climate, just being able to go on a break somewhere. Little things which are luxuries, and to be in fortunate positions. There's so much to be grateful. Death is just a reminder. It's a reminder, and it's only our fault if we forget, because God reminds us every day. And I think, especially as a doctor, he reminds us even more frequently than anybody else. And we got to just keep remembering.
Got to keep remembering. For us, what a great way to end. And I think that's a very poignant reminder, when to live life fully, to grab life by its horns, because it will be gone. One day. This time next century, we won't be here. Literally,
we won't.
This podcast might live on through a different platform, maybe watching Mars somewhere, but we certainly won't be here. And maybe in 50 years' time, we won't be here. That's the nature of life. We're here for a very brief lapse in history. If you look at the 14 billion years of Earth, we're here for a very short time. And it's about living life fully. And I think death really does bring that into focus. Faraz, it's been great having you on. It's been my longest podcast, actually. I've talked to you for ages. But I'm conscious you've got 4 kids, and you've probably got dinner time coming. So,
yeah.
It's been great having you on.
No.
How can people find you on social media?
Sorry?
How can people find you?
Well, first of all, Asif, thank you for inviting me and for considering my opinions and thoughts valid and worthy of your platform. So thank you. Secondly, inshallah, well, I'm trying to recalibrate my social media existence somewhat. So I'm on Instagram as Razgrams, with a dermatological focus, and I'm on Twitter as Raz Tweets. At the moment, my Twitter's playing up, so I'm trying to start that fresh, but you can count on me posting some interesting things, certainly as a doctor, but also as a Muslim, and I always reflect on there. So you can follow me on Raz Tweets on Twitter and Razgrams on Instagram for now. And, I look forward to anyone who wants to reach out and talk.
Great. And what about your blog? Is that online or is that private?
So, no, so actually, it's interesting. I when I blog, I post it all on Twitter anyway, so you'll find it there.
Thanks a lot. I look forward to following that. Raz,
thank you.
Raz, really good having you on. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Some really insightful lessons, and look forward to speaking to you in the future. And maybe come down to Wales and enjoy shawarma there.
Yeah, please do. Let me know. Thank you, Asif.
I'll just stop it now. Thank you.